And I'd like to officially welcome everyone. We're doing our chit chat welcomes. Thank you for coming. This is a presentation we're really excited to offer from New Jersey Cares Regional Early Intervention Collaborative and the New Jersey Early Intervention System. And we're really excited to welcome Dr. Gerry Costa to do our presentation tonight. You're welcome to put yourself on camera. We would love to see your faces. You're also welcome. We invite you to put your camera off if you'd like to do that as well, but we did set it up so that you could join us by camera. So I'd like to welcome Gerry, and he's got a pretty long list of accomplishments. We feel really lucky to know Gerry in New Jersey. He really is an internationally and nationally recognized psychologist, developmental and clinical psychologist, working with families, childcare centers, infant mental health programs, professionals, early intervention. And I always say, all roads lead to Gerry in New Jersey in this work. I feel like just building our capacity, our workforce, and really helping us to be supporting families and children, and especially our infants birth to 3. He always makes sure that we keep the infant in our work.
Keep that word, thanks.
That's right. He's received numerous awards, authors of articles. He's also founded the Center for Autism and Early Childhood Mental Health at Montclair State University. He serves as a trustee and the president of the Interdisciplinary Council on Development and Learning, consultant to 0 to 3 organization for over 20 years. And and he also has an infant mental health endorsement. He's established and founded and been past president of New Jersey Association for Infant Mental Health. And we're just really excited to have you here, Gerry.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Jennifer.
I'll turn it over to you, and keep your comments coming in the chat, and we'll keep you muted until later. We are planning to do a Q&A at the end about the last 15 minutes. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and Cynthia. Thanks for this invitation. I really appreciate the chance to spend time with my early intervention colleagues. I've spent a lot of my career within early intervention programs, and for about 17 years or so, I did lots of home visits. I've been on over 1,000 home visits in my career, and I've spent lots of time with families, and I've learned so much from families and from my multidisciplinary colleagues. And so I appreciate this. And I hung out many years ago with folks like Sue Ross and Cynthia Newman and Jennifer Blanchett McConnell and others. So I do feel privileged to have been part of this community. And I'm really happy tonight to talk about a topic that I think is in some ways so very simple. Listening, right? It by its nature, it sounds as if it should be kind of a secondhand automatic process, and yet there is something remarkable about what it feels like when we are not listened to, when children don't feel listened to or felt with. And I think what I'm going to try to do tonight is to really, in a very brief way, talk to you about the critical importance of listening to children, and even to highlight what is a remarkable assertion for the United Nations Bill of Rights for Children, which is that every child has the right to be heard. Every child has the right to be listened to. And so while we'll speak about it, certainly in terms of individual relationships, the children, the infants, toddlers, preschoolers, older children in your lives, it actually is a global concern. And I'm sure all of us, whatever your political stripes are, could imagine that if children had a voice, if we could really hear the voices of children and listen to them, I think they'd want a very different world than the world we live in right now. And so I think in some ways, I believe presentations like this are designed to be change agents, are designed to really promote some kind of shift in our availability to connect with infants and toddlers and preschoolers, the youngest amongst us. But I do have to say for tonight, it would be tragic if I didn't give voice to the horrible tragedy that occurred today in Uvalde, Texas, with 15, a teacher and 15 young elementary school children being killed. This is the most tragic of events, and I think all of us in this space have seen this so many times. There were 61 mass shootings in 2021, I'm sorry, 61 mass shootings in 2021. And that was a 51% increase from 2020. And we are seeing already in 2022, these horrible, horrible moments in our lives. With young shooters, 18-year-old today, 18-year-old in Buffalo, children who I think we cannot help but wonder where along the way it became hard for us to hear or listen to what their struggles were as they were veering away from relationships and connections and a sense of security and safety, and instead began to become overwhelmed internally by a darker, much more sinister and painful experience of being human. And so I know we can't speak about it tonight. I know we have to protect our time for the topic that we have, promised. But I do want to say that although I'm the past president, I'm past director of the Center for Autism and Early Childhood Mental Health. I retired in January, although I'm really kind of active. The center remains very involved under the leadership of Dr. Caitlin Mulcahy. And as we've done in the past 11 years since our inception, the center will issue some talking points, some guidelines to help parents and teachers to know how to speak to children and listen to children about this unspeakable tragedy that occurs in our society. So, however, I again mourn with you about the tragedy today. So my topic today is really listening to children and helping them to tell their stories in times of stress. And it certainly is right now something we are thinking lots about. At one time, as you all know, we might have indulged in a fantasy that very young children, infants and toddlers, by virtue of their immaturity or prematurity, we might have imagined that they can be saved from being affected by tragic events. I think at one time we all imagined that children were too young and too undeveloped to be affected by adversity. We know that's not true. We know, in fact, that no matter what the age, certainly children are always affected, even very young infants, affected by frightening events that occur in their presence, damage to their relationships, when their relationships themselves are hurtful or abusive or neglectful, when there are sins of omission, good things left out of their lives, and sins of commission, bad things happen to them, they suffer. And while perhaps around 25, 26 months of age, we begin to see children have the verbal recall and the verbal ability to sometimes describe what's happened to them. Children younger than that age certainly hold on to these memories in their bodies. There's a tragically true book written by Bessel van der Kolk, and entitled "The Body Remembers." The body keeps the score. And I think in that regard, we know that young children feel it in their bodies and in their minds, even when they can't express it in words. And so in some sense, the listening to children without words is really critical. So I want to address that at some point today. So all children, no matter what their age, especially the very young, we'll focus on today, are vulnerable to the effects of fear and worry, especially, as I said, when the adults in their lives are also under stress. And these effects are felt in the body and mind well before children can find the words to describe how they feel. I think we all know that this pandemic has been overwhelmingly stressful on the lives of infants and toddlers and preschoolers and older children and families and teachers and caregivers and all systems. And in many ways, I think how children have been feeling about this has been one of the areas that we have tried to really hard in this field of infant and early childhood mental health to figure out, to wonder about. So much of what happens among children and between children and the adults are pre-verbal and nonverbal. Even when children have language, by the way, a lot of what occurs are felt and shared through gestures, through voice, through movement, through or pacing, through the interpersonal dance that happens. And I actually hope that that we have time by the end of this presentation, and we'll have a chance, I hope, to talk a bit. I hope by the end, though, you'll have a real understanding of how remarkable our nonverbal and pre-verbal interactions are with children, and in many respects, even more powerfully important than the words we use in the verbal interactions. So hopefully we'll get to there. So I'd like to explore the ways that we adults can help children, even young infants, to find the gestures and the words to tell their story when things are frightening, when things upset them. Children need to be heard and listened to so they don't feel alone in their worries, and to help them find ways to cope, to feel better through what is most needed under stress, and that's the human, loving, emotional connection. The good news is, by the way, that all of us, especially infants and young children, when we are under stress, when that part of our brain that really responds to stress activates our fight or flight or freeze system, the first thing we do is not fight or flee or freeze. The first thing we try to do is find the connection with someone who cares about us, someone who loves us. It is when that inability to find that person, or the person themselves are disabled by the stress, that the fight or flight or freeze response is most active. But again, I think we will focus on the nature of your loving relationship. So you'll love this, I hope, right? This is one of the things, and some of you have seen this presentation in some variation. But I've spent lots of time in my career talking about what happens in the infant mind and the infant brain in normal everyday activities, in normal moments of back and forth, serve and return, pleasurable interactions. And so what I decided to do a number of years ago is to really unpack the Jack-in-the-Box. Now, you all know what a Jack-in-the-Box is, right? Now, as I unpack the Jack-in-the-Box and I show you some little video clips, I think the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is answer the question, once we look at this carefully, whatever made us think this was fun? Whatever made us think this is play? Now, the truth be told, it does become play. It does become fun. And that's probably a very meaningful twist, to know that sometimes the things we have fun with are the scary things that become less scary and therefore safe. So it's sometimes okay to play with scary things because it makes us feel stronger. So one way of wondering about the Jack-in-the-Box may be that way. So what I'd like to do is show you a little moment in the life of a 7-month-old named Dane. This is little Dane, and he had seen the Jack-in-the-Box once before with his mother. So this is the second time that Dane will look at the Jack-in-the-Box. So I want you to look at it with me. All right.
Okay, here we go. Ready?
Can you hear it? Look at his face.
What's wrong, big guy? Oh, it's just
So that is the Jack-in-the-Box, right? That is a moment in Dane's life that he didn't expect. a frightening moment. So I want to use this relatively benign, although not inconsequential moment to talk about what happened inside Dane. So remember, he had seen the Jack in the Box once before. So as his mother turns the crank, he looks at the Jack in the Box, right? He looks at what's about to happen. Then what does he do? He looks at his mother. Check that out, right? The first thing he does in this moment where he's beginning to anticipate something frightening, he needs to connect. He needs to look at his parent. Now, by the way, that moment is critical because this is what the relationship does. This, in some ways, is the beginning of being listened to, of having an internal moment that he can't express, but that through his eyes and gestures, he's looking to see if you're feeling with him, right? So he looks back, looks at his mother, then suddenly the crank continues to turn. He sees the Jack pop up, and he goes into a full-blown fight or flight or freeze. This is his brain under stress is activated, and he is in full-blown hysteria. What does he do again? He looks at his mother. And what does she do? She swoops right in, lovingly and gently comforts Dane to let him know everything is fine. You'll be okay. We can repair what happened, right? So in some sense, just so you know, this graphic on the screen, taken from this remarkable British infant mental health specialist named Colwyn Trevarthen, is a representation of the remarkable back and forth that happens between a parent and child in terms of their eyes, their voices, their gestures, their hand movements, their faces. We are constantly interacting with each other. And what we may never have known, but we now know the past 30 years, is that in addition, our brains are communicating with each other. And so the infant's brain under stress can look at a mother whose brain hopefully is not under stress. And that mother or that caregiver, that father, can actually then, in their own way, help the infant's brain become less stressed by calming the infant through gestures and listening. But at this moment, right, what we saw here is he was really upset, and his mother swooped in and helped him. So remember that little Dane, in addition to having this wonderful growing mind, is actually also having a brain that is reacting to this moment. And this brain, it turns out, is formed from the moment life begins through not only the genes that are passed on by his parents, but the brain is fundamentally organized through interactions and relationships. Our brain, in fact, surprisingly, is a social organ. It actually develops through relationships. So get this, and this is sort of information about brain systems that I think all of us need to know. By 5 months in the womb, 5 months gestation, the human fetus already has 100 billion nerve cells. That's about the number of brain cells we will have as adults. So by 5 months gestation, we have our basic genetic equipment within our brain. But, and by the way, that's about the number of stars in the Milky Way. So within our small brain, there are these remarkably large number of neurons. But only 20% of those nerve cells are connected with each other through genetics and through our intrauterine life, which means 80% of the connections that are formed through the nature of experiences and interpersonal relationships will occur following birth. So just for the moment, think about our little friend Dane, right? That brain with 100 billion neurons, which allows Dane to see, to hear, to smell, to touch, to taste, to feel his body, right? It also allows him to have a part of the brain that when danger happens, it gets activated and prepares his body for fight or flight or freezing. And all of those areas are critical to his survival. But what happens through relationships is connections are made among the various areas. 80% of what will be happening in our brain is formed through the nature of relationships. And to really make this point even clearer, of those 100 billion nerve cells, neurons, each of those can form up to 10,000 other connections to other nerve cells. And so that occurs. Those connections are called synapses. You probably have heard that word. And that can occur per neuron, per nerve cell at 700 connections a second, 1 million plus connections per second brain-wide. So I often say your brain is not a noun, it's a verb. It's active, it's pulsing, it's taking the world in, right? So in those moments that Dane was frightened by the Jack-in-the-Box, looking at his mother, getting comforted, a whole cascade of events were happening. Interestingly, and I'll tell you in advance, what we know is when the brain is suffering under stress and that survival brain gets activated, one of the best ways to help the survival brain be calmed is by feeling, being felt with by someone else, someone hearing and listening to your experience, your story. So to make that even a little clearer, hey, I think, did someone raise their hand? I just noticed, Che, I don't know.
They did. I was thinking we would do questions at the end. I was just going to chat them unless you wanted to take questions in the middle, Gerry.
If it's an urgent question about something I said that's not clear, go for it. But if you can wait, Che, let's wait until the end. It may even be, by the way, Che doesn't know how to put her hand down. That's one of the things about this. So, Che, but you let them know. You let them know, please. All right. So let me unpack even more what's happening, right, in the brain systems under stress. So if we were to look at the brain, there are these two organs I want to talk with you about. The brain, in many ways, is not one brain, it's multiple brains. There are many brains we have within our head. And one model of the brain is called the triune or three-part brain. That three-part brain is that there's a reptilian brain, that's the lower brain that takes care of all of our vegetative functioning, our heart rate or blood pressure or circulation. Then there's a middle brain called the limbic system, which is really the brain that's most involved with stress and emotion and fight or flight or freeze. And then there's the top of the brain called the thinking brain, the cortex. So right now, if we were to look at that middle brain, that limbic system, I want to just point out two organs that make a difference in our conversation. There's an organ on the left side and the right side called the amygdala. And that little organ is what activates a cascade of changes in your brain when there is a sense of something occurring that is unexpected or frightening. Could be as simple as a loud noise, a sudden appearance of someone yelling or being angry, something unfavorable happening. They can be more tragic things like a hurricane or abuse individually, or it could be something even more slower moving, like the stress of someone being ill, someone moving to a new location, being removed from a home and placed someplace else. Those are all the kinds of things. Well, the amygdala is a social processor. And when the amygdala senses some danger or fear, it activates a whole cascade of events that activate our fight or flight or freeze systems. It's right next to another organ called the hippocampus, which is the memory center. And what the hippocampus does is that it remembers the events that happen that the amygdala gets activated by. So if a warm, loving person comes up to the baby and kisses the baby and holds the baby and becomes familiar to the baby, the amygdala remembers that this person is safe and loving and warm. And the amygdala does not activate the fight or flight or freeze system. And the amygdala, in a sense, tells the hippocampus, hey, remember this person. We like her. Don't get frightened by her or him. We won't become anxious. And so the hippocampus is a memory center. The amygdala is the processor. On the other hand, if that person approaches or this event occurs and that event is frightening, the amygdala will create a cascade of events that results in the fight or flight or freeze response. And the hippocampus will remember that as well. And so the middle brain, that limbic system, is really what we're going to touch on for the moment. And so another way of presenting this triune three-part brain is just on this graphic. That reptilian brain is the lower brain, the limbic system is the middle brain, and the top brain is the thinking brain. So that amygdala, as I said, really reacts to the world, and it gets wired based on real experiences. So I'm going to show you this, if you can, even though all of you, I know I cannot see you. I hope you can see me. So I all want you to hold up your hand as if you're doing the Pledge of Allegiance or something like that. Hold up your hand. And I want you to imagine that your hand, this is called the handy model of the brain, by the way. The handy model of the brain was developed by this remarkable neuropsychiatrist and author and mindfulness specialist, Dan Siegel. And so hold up your hand and imagine that your wrist and arm is your spinal cord and the reptilian brain, that brown area on the prior slide. Your thumb is the limbic system, and your fingers are the top of the brain, the neocortex, the blue brain. So here's what I want you to do. Imagine, as the way it is in your body, that your limbic system, put it on your palm and cover your thumb with your fingers. And that's similar to how it is in your brain. The top of your brain is the cortex, the thinking brain. Embedded right above the roof of your mouth are all these organs that are the limbic system, and your wrist and arm are the spinal cord and the reptilian brain. But here's the catch. Whenever your limbic system gets activated, when your amygdala senses danger, your amygdala begins to activate your fight or flight or freeze system. And when your survival brain gets activated, your thinking brain gets derailed. And so one way of thinking about this is that when you have an amygdala that's activated under stress, you flip your lid. Lift up your fingers, you flip your lid. So Dan Siegel says, lift up your fingers and you'll get an image of how we flip our lids and head down the low road in our interaction with others. Now, why am I telling all of this to you as part of a wondering about listening? Because believe it or not, it turns out that when children feel felt with and listened to, they are much less likely to flip their lids. And guess what? We adults are the same. When we have an experience, forgive me, some of my slides, I think, are timed and I didn't realize it. And so they change on their own. So I want to keep on this slide. So the idea that our brain systems are designed really to be helped by others, and that under stress, when our survival brain activates, our thinking brain gets derailed. So all of this is to say, under stress, something happens in our brain that makes it less likely we can pay attention. I'm sure you all have had this experience. For those of you who are maybe closer to having been in college or graduate school, but even in work settings, even certainly in our private lives, where you've been anxious and you can't remember something, but when you calm down, you can remember it. Whenever stress occurs, our thinking brain is somewhat rendered less effective. So when the survival brain activates and you flip your lid, you're less available. And so this idea of how our nervous system works is actually a fundamental part of why whenever stress occurs, what we need from the adults in our lives or people to feel with us. And so if you remember when Dane got upset, right? What happened from Dane is that his stress system activated. And that led to this system that's sometimes referred to, by the way, as the HPA system. This is just shorthand. And that means when stress occurs, the amygdala sends a signal to the major gland, the hypothalamus, which in turn sends a signal to the pituitary gland, a master gland in your brain. And that then pours hormones into your bloodstream that arrive at your adrenal glands, which sit right above the kidneys, and adrenal glands pump out adrenaline. So when you are pumped up with adrenaline, your heart rate increases, your blood pressure increases, your respiration quickens, your digestion slows down, and everything in your body readies you to fight, to flee, or if you can't do either, to freeze. So this HPA system. Now, this is what stress does to children, and listening, it turns out, is a big part of stress reduction. So as I said, when Dane was activated and his body was undergoing stress, his mother's, in a sense, ability to calm him is what made the difference in returning to a sense of being safe and calm. And so the mother's limbic system, this is one way we think about it. And I think we can think about this even in our own lives. The mother's limbic system seems to communicate directly to a baby's limbic system. So when a parent can remain calm and engage a child who's upset, the parent can co-regulate and calm the child. By the way, think of yourselves. Have you ever been in the room with someone who's very angry or upset, and you can't help but feel those vibrations from them? You begin to feel similarly to the person. There's actually this interpersonal process that happens where, in fact, one person's brain can affect another person's experience of brain systems. This is certainly true for adults. And so you'll see that where I'm heading with this all is to really try to help you know that the way we best can help infants, toddlers, preschoolers, and even older children and adults is to pay attention to our own state, our own facial expressions, the tone of our voice, the way we are. And that's really partly what we will do when we talk about what it means to listen to a child and help regulate them. So I'm going to just do a quick review with you of what happened to Dane. What happened to Dane. So if you remember the last time we left Dane, he was really kind of suffering, and his mother swooped in and really conveyed to Dane this feeling that she would help him feel better, that everything would be fine, that she, in some sense, helped deal with the crisis. So I want to show you a month and a half later, what happened to Dane after a series of experiences with his warm, loving, co-regulating mother. So take a look at Dane now.
Okay, let's show everyone what a big boy you are. Okay, here we go. That came out early, didn't it?
Look at his face.
You know it's gonna come, don't you? See, we like it now.
So I love it, right? What happened, if we had more time, and I can't, if you could look at what happened, it's not that he thought this event was no longer frightening, but it was a fear he could anticipate and feel stronger than, right? So in some sense, it took the pain away from the experience because of the relationship. Now, this is not just something we see in little moments like this, where a child who had been afraid of something, but as he grows and relationships help the child stay regulated, the child no longer frightened. But this is true in terms of brain-wide systems. So It turns out that when neuroimaging occurs and the brains of children who are in relationships where they feel safe and secure, when those brain images are examined, their brains are more efficiently wired. It turns out that the way in which their brain operates is that there are parts of their brain which are not needed every day and they don't get activated. Their brains operate more efficiently. They're not hardwired to react with stress or worry. And so the truth is, partly that happens because babies are much more responsive and much more sensitive to emotion and gesture and intonation, what's called the musicality, than even the words themselves. And so while Dane's mother said the right things, what was really careful was her swooping in, her touch, her warmth, the lilting of her voice. There was something about her helping him feel listened to and felt with. And so in many ways, one of the lessons about listening to children is recognizing that they are more responsive to your facial expressions and voice and affect and gestures. The right brain for the baby, that part of the brain that listens and is tuned in to these intonation, and affect, is online before the left side of the brain. And that amygdala I mentioned, that limbic system, is really ready to form relationships. And so all of this is amazing because, believe it or not, there's research now that shows us that babies at birth are beginning already to be inclined to look for features of safety. And what do babies look for? They look for voices that are comforting, quieting, supportive. And so your facial expressions, voice, are much more critical in the way you are with babies. I often tell folks, walk into a child care center, and the first thing I want you to do is look at how the adults are talking to the babies or the toddlers or the preschoolers. Look at how the adults are speaking with each other. Look at how the children are looking at each other and speaking with each other. Because what you are hoping you see is this reflective kind of rich affect and gestures. You know, many early childhood educators have been taught so much wonderful theory about learning and early childhood education, but they've really not always been helped to know how their own relationship affects children, how their own demeanor and posture and voice. And it's remarkable. So these are some of the lessons. So I want you to take a quick look at this little video that illustrates it, I think, nicely. And I'll explain what this is, and you may be familiar with it.
Yo, comedian Michael Jr. here. As you know, I just flat out enjoy doing comedy. But one of the things I love way more than that is being a dad. Not too long ago, I'm going through some video footage, and I run into this video of my youngest daughter being born. Now, of course, I was there. I actually took the video, but I had never really experienced it from this perspective before. Now, look, we're in the hospital room. She's sticky and she's baby and all that stuff, and she's in the middle of crying. And then I speak up. I start talking to her, and watch how she responds when she hears my voice. Okay, Portland, look, I'm right here. It's okay, it's okay. I'm right here, I'm right here. We're doing just fine. It's okay. It's okay, I'm right here. Right here. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay, baby. It's okay. That was pretty awesome. So check it. A few minutes later, the nurse starts working on her, puts her pamper on her, and I'm not saying anything, and she actually starts to cry again. Then I speak up, she hears my voice and stops crying, like again. But I want you to notice what else happens after I tell her that I love her. Portland, it's okay. It's okay. It's good. It's good. It's good. I'm right here. I'm right here. I am right here. I love you. I love you. I love you. Yeah, I'm right here. I'm right here. It's okay. It's okay. That's just phenomenal. I'm like, whoa. Here's the thing. We'll always have times where we're not as comfortable, probably even to the point of tears, where life is just heavy. The key thing to do in those moments is to be still and listen for the Father's voice. Because he is trying to talk to you. And I can tell you what he wants you to know is that he loves you. All you got to do is open your eyes. Happy Father's Day.
So this is such a beautiful little illustration. And by the way, Michael Jr. is a comedian in Canada. And as you can tell, of course, he certainly had another message about Father's Day here, but also in his own way, a religious theme as well. And I think that's beautiful. But I think the point I really wanted to make with you is babies are already in utero being wired to recognize their parents' voices. And there's a long line of research that manifests how remarkably competent babies are. But even these very young babies are hardwired to recognize and be comforted by their own parents' voices compared to other voices. And I think Michael Jr. shows that beautifully. And this is partly a new area of our science. So I wanted to sort of come to this point, and now with some knowledge of how our brain systems work, some knowledge of how dependent babies are on the relationships in their lives to really help themselves when stress occurs, and even how their brains are wired. But what I want to do is share with you this other framework about the idea of listening to children. And so some of you may know the Dr. June Ladley. Dr. June Ladley is actually the director of the Fred Rogers Center at Family Connections in Pittsburgh. This is Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, folks. And he developed some really interesting tools. So this is a tool I'm not going to show you on this form, but he developed this way of thinking about how do we interact with children. And I want you to think about even babies. So what he talks about is the first thing we have to do is make a connection, right? That, in the left here, where one is negative or hostile, that doesn't seem to really help. Or if they're turning away from each other and detached, right? Or even these connections here is their mismatch. So this one is smiling, but this one is unhappy. That doesn't work. But what you're trying to do is be mutually present all the time, mirroring what a baby's face is in your face, his posture with your posture, right? So mirroring that connection. You also are hoping to have what's called that serve and return, this back and forth, our ability to be with our babies and toddlers and preschoolers, where we actually interact back and forth with them. And so this panel again shows that in one case, you might be resistant or disengaged, where you're not engaging with the child. And another, you're overwhelming the child. You're insisting that the child follow your lead, and whatever is happening, you're controlling it. But the real gift is to look for opportunities where there's a back and forth, a two-way back and forth, serve and return. And then finally, because not every child has the same ability. Not every child is able to be as calm, as engaged, as communicative. We really have to find ways to really be sure that we include children who may have some differences. And so in this example, the child here is left out of the group, and the child is not being included. In this second model, well, the child is being attended to, but the child is not part of the group. And so our goal is to try to include children fully in communication systems where we have them with other children, and we as the adults have that ability to connect with them and promote that kind of inclusion. because I think I don't have enough time, I'm going to skip this one. So I mentioned to you early on that there is a United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I love this Article 12, where it says every child has a right to express their views and have them taken seriously. Now, here's what I want to say here. I think this must be what we feel for babies. It must be what we feel for toddlers and preschoolers. What that means is it is easy for us adults to hear a baby crying and being upset and think it really doesn't mean much. And I think we are probably an unusually sensitive group that we take seriously the affects and gestures of babies. But it's really critical that every child have the ability to be listened to be attuned to be felt with. And so I want to talk about that a little bit. So the Centers for Disease Control, and by the way, we're sharing these PowerPoints with you. And for those who know about PowerPoints, this slide is violating every rule of PowerPoint. There's way too many words on it. So I hope it's something you'll look at following our presentation. But the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, has this remarkable website on helping parents think about how do we actively listen to our children. So I'm going to just show you this and another, but I actually developed an illustration for a baby. So, but listen if I can to read this out loud to you. And I'm sure this is going to resonate with some of you who have maybe a child who's a little bit older. Your child's baseball game is at 6 o'clock. You only have a short time to make dinner, help with homework, get everyone ready for the game. While the kids play, you quickly start making dinner. Soon you hear your son crying. He comes and tells you that his brother hit him and called him a bad name. You are tempted to keep making dinner while nodding your head at what your child is saying. But then you decide to show him you were actively listening. You stop what you are doing, turn to him, make eye contact, and summarize what he has told you and how he seems to be feeling. You say, it sounds like your brother made you sad when he hit you and said mean things. By doing this, you have let your child know that he has your full attention. He knows that his emotions and feelings are important to you. Sometimes a child who is upset may not be able to name the emotion that she is feeling. Active listening can be a great way to help her. So I want you to think about that vignette, right? How many of us have been in this situation where we just in the moment have such a hard time being present? So it's just a way of thinking about it. I want you to listen to this one. You pick up your daughter from preschool. She is crying and tells you that a friend took her favorite toy and stuck out his tongue at her. You show her that you are actively listening when you say, it seems like you are sad about your friend taking your favorite toy. Your daughter continues to cry and nods her head. She says that she thinks her friend will break the toy. You show her that you were still actively listening by saying, so you were scared that your friend might break your toy. At this time, your daughter calms down a bit, just being listened to. You and your daughter continue to talk, and she knows that it's okay to be upset. She has begun to learn how to label and cope with her feelings by talking to someone. Look, these are very simple illustrations to give you the idea, but I want you to look at this one for a baby. And again, boy, do I break the rules of PowerPoint here with words, but I'm going to read it out loud for you, and I want you to think about it. It's 8 a.m. and you just dropped your 3-year-old daughter at the daycare center. You return with your 8-month-old son in tow and place him in his crib as he fell asleep in the car. You begin to wash the dishes and your cell phone rings. You turn the water off and wipe your hands on a dish towel. Just at that moment, your baby starts crying. As you go to the crib, you say to your baby, I'm coming, Phil, Daddy's on his way. You then look at the phone to be sure you can let the call go to voicemail. You arrive at the crib and smile at Philip, lean over and look at Philip with a facial expression that shows him you are feeling this crying with him. You first pause and smile and gently ask, what's up, little guy? Did the phone startle you? You pause and just look at him for a moment, and he stops crying and smiles at you. You smile back and say, "Oh, it is so good to see you smile. Can Dad pick you up?" You see that Philip reaches his arms toward you and lifts his shoulders off the mattress to get ready for your hands and arms. You reach down and hold his head with one hand and his body with your other, and you lift him up slowly so he feels held all of the time. You have learned that he first needs to be held and gently rocked when he awakens. So you don't look at him or talk too much. You just hold him, your shoulder, and hold him in your shoulders and sway gently. In a moment, he quiets and lifts his head to look at you, and he smiles. You smile back, but do so quietly and softly to help him transition to being fully awake. Then he touches your mouth with his hands and you kiss them gently. He is ready for interaction. This whole notion is being fully present, being available, right? So I have to tell you, I know I'm cutting close on time, and I really want to show you one other thing. So again, I think these are just some guidelines about active listening, but I wanted to show you two quick video clips. Some of you may remember in Paris in 2015, there was a Paris bombing attack. And I don't know if any of you had seen this interview of a father and his young child after the Paris attacks, but I couldn't imagine a more thoughtful listening and interacting between this child and father. So I want you to listen to this. I hope it's working.
Tu comprends ce qui s'est passé? Tu comprends pourquoi ces gens, ils ont fait ça?
Oui, parce qu'ils sont très, très, très méchants. Les méchants, c'est pas très gentil, les méchants. Et il faut faire vraiment attention parce il faut changer de maison.
Non, t'inquiète pas. T'as pas besoin de changer de maison. C'est la France, notre maison.
Mais il y a des méchants, papa.
Oui, mais il y a des méchants partout. Il y a des méchants partout.
Ils ont les pistolets, ils peuvent nous tirer dessus parce qu'ils sont très, très méchants, papa.
C'est pas grave, ils ont des pistolets, nous on a des fleurs.
Bah, les fleurs, ça fait rien, c'est pour.
Si regarde, tu vois, tout le monde pose des fleurs.
Oui.
C'est pour combattre les pistolets.
C'est pour protéger.
Look at
Et
the
les
child's
bougies
face.
aussi.
C'est pour ne pas oublier les gens qui sont partis. Hein.
C'est pour nous protéger les fleurs et les bougies.
Ça va mieux du coup?
Oui, ça va mieux.
I suspect there may be some of you who look at that and are a bit concerned, right? That the father, in fact, maybe is minimizing this horrible tragedy. But from the child's point of view, by the way, we could have imagined how a father in the face of such a tragedy would be overwhelmed himself by the meaning of this all and might impose his worrisome, anxious ways on this child. I thought it was so remarkable that he helped co-regulate his child, but really tried to listen to what the child's voice was about. So I developed this little framework that I mentioned to you about, or that I would like to mention to you about how critical it is when we are listening to children to really pay attention to our own affect. And so what I developed is something called AHA and AGILE. AHA is when you are about to connect with your child, try to observe your child's state and their emotions and your own state and what your state is, and try to calm yourself before anything first. Wonder about how you might help support the child through your interactions and emotions, and then act using what I call an AGILE guideline. And that is pay attention to your facial expressions and affect. Pay attention to your gestures, your facial expressions, hand movements, posture, pacing. tone of your voice, intonation. It turns out intonation is by far the most critical element that children will react to. I thought, and looking back at that French dad and child, I think there was a way in which the father's affect and gestures were remarkable, a tone of voice. I also think there was a period of time where you have to let the child take you in, pause, let the child connect with you. And when the child is connecting, then engage the child. And so I actually developed a little card that I actually have laminated for many folks. I think some of you may have gotten it once, but this Agile card. So let me ask you, Jennifer and Cynthia, I wonder if I could take another five seconds. I'm sorry, about 5 minutes, just to show this final clip I wanted to show.
I think that's fine. Yeah.
Yep.
I think that if anyone has questions, if you want to chat them to me or Karen, or you can put them in the chat, and we'll try to summarize.
We'll try to get.
But I don't have any too many yet.
All right. So here's what I wanted to share with you. Dr. June Ladley, that's the person I mentioned earlier, the co-director of the Fred Rogers Center, shared this video clip. It turns out that Family Communications Incorporated in Pittsburgh, the Mr. Rogers Neighborhood group, did a project with the crossing guards in Pittsburgh. And they really were interested in learning more about what the crossing guards' roles were like and what they did. And this is a video clip of a crossing guard named Miss Paula. And the whole purpose for June Ladley to share this was to talk about this idea of listening, of tuning into a child, of watching your affect, showing your interest, pacing. So I'm going to show you a very small clip from this video, and I hope I got it right. I think I do.
Good morning. I like you here. Go ahead.
I just realized you couldn't see it. Hold on.
What's your jacket at? You ain't cold? Okay. What's your, I know, Steve, you got a jacket, huh? He said, I am. Good morning. She's growing up to be so beautiful. Look at her. Wow. I know. Wow. She looks just like you. That's your twin right there. Oh my. Good morning. Y'all go to the high school? Yes. All right. Have a blessed day. Thank you. You're welcome, baby. And your lips are shivering. Oh, you care. That's, yeah, me too. That's the worst time when my face is cold. Yeah, I feel like, oh, mama, shh. I wish I could just warm you up. It's just like my hair look good. My face is cold. Well, hurry up and then. It's time to go in, okay? Good morning. Good morning. So, when are we going to know about the election? When you going to know if you won or not? Oh, hi. I got my fingers crossed for you. Even though I didn't get a cupcake, but I got my fingers crossed. Good morning, guys. Oh, your nails. Let me see your nails. All right, now. Let me see y'all of yours. All right, now. Go now. Your bad self. You cold? I'm a fall baby. You a fall baby? Yeah, my birthday's November. See, I hold traffic for you. Good morning, baby girl. I like your little bun. You mom did your hair?
I'm going to have to stop. I know we're a little tight on time, but when June Ladley shared that video, and when I look at it now, I continue to say, what is it about the crossing guard that gets her to do that? You know, maybe 5 seconds with each child, but that knowledge that the child, she knows the color of the nail polish, she knows when this child is running for student government, and she's asking them, why don't they have their coat on? What is it that drives her? 5 seconds per child, but the child feels felt with, feels understood, listened to. Listening to children, and I probably should have begun with this, may sound like a daunting task. But as I said to you earlier, in some sense, it's really the most basic thing we can do if we can identify in our own mind the clutter that gets in the way, the stuff that can make it harder for us. I love that story about Miss Paula. And I think what made it particularly interesting to me is, by the way, my mother was a crossing guard for 17 years. And this is my mother, passed away at the age of 89 about 8 or 9 years ago. But I thought, we somehow think that listening is a daunting task, or that listening means, we have to just, spend hours. It's wonderful when we do, but it's really about these moments of trying to tune in, of our affect or gestures or movement. I loved listening to Miss Paula, and I imagined how nice it would be. Didn't mean to do that, and I'm done. And I imagined how nice it would be if we all could be a little bit like Miss Paula, So, so the bottom line, I hope, is that listening to children, it turns out, is what children require in order for them to come to know themselves. It's what helps children under stress feel felt with and understood. And it really forms the building blocks for how we become fully human. So I know we had a little time, but I'd love to hear some of your questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Gerry. That was awesome. I think you put information in a way that's so easy for anyone to understand. When you see all those slides, you're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of brain. That's a lot of stuff. And then you just say, you're explaining how our brains basically are talking to each other, even when we're not talking. So I love it. I think there's some comments in the chat. Folks can scroll through. Yeah, I tried to summarize a little. I don't know if anybody had a particular question or maybe
I love Barbara Bowers, who said, I had a crossing guard just like her growing up. I felt so connected to her. Start off my day with a smile. It's remarkable. Now I just turned 70. My friends here know that. My mother, as a crossing guard, when I would walk to school, I would pass her corner so I could just check in with her before I went to school. And I have become lifelong friends with some of the kids who she crossed. So I actually am lifelong friends with some of those kids. I think what she meant to these kids was remarkable, and she wasn't paid by the school district. She wasn't an official person in their lives, but she made a great deal. So I'd love to hear some of your other connections. I see Lori. Hi, this is Lori Creighton, speech therapist with Virtua. I don't want to, that sounds too self-serving. Thanks for saying that. Lori, I was going to read something. But I'd love to hear from some of you in terms of the whole notion of listening to children. I'd love to hear what was your takeaway? What was the thing that came to your mind as I was talking, probably a little bit too much?
Especially love to hear from our families, our parents, maybe if this is sort of new information for you. I know some of us, it's not as new, but it's still so interesting to hear, but I want to open it up to anyone who really, you can raise your hand or you can just try to unmute. Carla, I think you're texting to me. I don't know if you wanted to share that with the whole group or not. I mean, chatting.
And it's interesting. I love so much when we have chance just to have a conversation. And I think this presentation probably was a little bit too long. I would have loved to have just left time just to chat. So if you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. that will stop after 2 rings. I'm sorry.
I'd like to just say that when you're parenting a child with special needs, the skills of the parent may need to be a little more involved. Like when you have a child that may not feel well, maybe on medications, maybe facing surgeries, and that mutual shaping and what's required of the parent may be a little more heightened than.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you're right, Cindy. You know, one of the things that I implied, but I think is worth making clear is, you know, there are many times children who struggle with their own sensory systems and their own body systems. And oftentimes when they have a strong emotion or a strong feeling, the way in which they feel that feeling in their body can really be uncomfortable for them. And it may make it hard for them to identify, you know, how they feel. And so at those times, it's so helpful if a parent can sort of, you know, take a good guess as to what they think the child might be feeling. And even with gestures and voice and some words, offer the child an idea. Oh, honey, you look so upset. Can mommy squeeze you? Can mommy hold you? Or can daddy hold you? And I also think sometimes, I think all of us as parents have probably figured this out every so often, but it doesn't always make it easy. That sometimes I've learned that when a child is really struggling to feel calmer and to feel connected, that sometimes we can, without meaning to, try so hard. Our own level of kind of earnestness comes through. I've learned sometimes it is so helpful to think about one modality. So don't talk and make faces and loud voices and touch. Just do one. Maybe just hold and rock, or maybe just sit with the child and look at them and talk, but without touching. Sometimes the multisensory systems make it harder for a child to feel listened to and to feel organized. So I think that helps sometimes to really think about that. And, you know, of course, we all know about lending our own calm, getting in cahoots with yourself, being aware of what your state is, what your level of calm is. You know, one of the slides I just couldn't get to is this wonderful slide that reminds us that children eventually, like Dane, learn to self-calm by first being calmed by their parents. And so we talk about this co-regulating before we self-regulate. You know? And so that helps sometimes. But I'd love it. Are there any other thoughts?
There's a hand up, Imaginite. I don't know if I'm saying your name right, but if you want to unmute, I'm sure
Hi.
it sounds better when you say it.
It's Imajini, but Emma.
Imagine.
Hello, Imajini. Hello.
Hi. Thank you for this great presentation. Just to add, said, and also what you said, Dr. Costa, it's important to, you know, use the parents as our partners, especially when we're trying to listen, in a sense, to children who may be pre-verbal or not speaking yet. Like what I like to do in my DI sessions when I'm first starting, you know, ask the parents, how are they communicating now? What does frustration, maybe anger, because it helps, especially if we're only in the home for an hour or less, just to get all of that preliminary information. It works well with transitions, with co-regulating. I think you said also the child has that innate thing to recognize the parent's voice. Do you think possibly asking parents what they use, like when they're trying to regulate the child, maybe phrases, do you think that helps? Or does it help to kind of let the parent hone in on that de-escalation if that's needed during the session?
Well, I think it certainly helps if you do ask the parent what they found in the past that helps the child calm, whether it is a certain way of being held or a phrase or you know, some experience, even a certain way of being held. I think that really is a good idea. Much need to do that. I also think that, you know, one of the I think one of the most important pieces of our work, I think, as interventionists and as supporters of families is, there's this old line about our work that we are always concerned about the infant's developmental progress. That's always part of our concern. We always want to be sure that we help the parent in their feeling more effective and more adequate. But really, our primary relationship, from my point of view, is to be sure we work on being sure the relationship is one that's happy and satisfying, right? And so we're working on the relationship between the baby and or the infant and the parent. And I think sometimes that means that we can really talk to the parent in very honest ways about how important it is that they feel taken care of, that they do things to take care of themselves. The very true statement is that the most important thing for an infant in early intervention is having a parent who feels healthy and well taken care of. Helping parents even learn some strategies for self-care, helping parents learn some ways of self-regulating. We talk so much, and I think many of you have probably heard about this idea of self-regulation, but this idea of how do we calm ourselves? How do we lend our calm to our babies? I also think, look, we all know this, right? When we are frustrated, when we are tired and exhausted, and our baby is just having a hard time calming down, they can't get their body in that right place, they can't sort of find a way to relax. It's so hard for us to sort of lend our calm to the baby, right? And so I think at those times I would really want to talk to the parent about how we can help them in the moment, so that they can help their baby. But I think imagine wherever you are, because you moved around on my screen. I have to find you. I'm not sure if I can see you. Oh yeah, I see you. I see you. I think your comment was a wonderful one.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think what you just said addresses another question about kind of how to share this information with families without, making them feel overwhelmed. And I think you just nicely described, kind of how we are with the parents that we work with, those of us who are working with families is, everything you said applies to, well, first, let me connect. Are you talking to me with your limbic system? Are you anxious? Are you worried? Are you upset? And then same thing. We work with the adults in a way that, the same ways that you talked about with children today. We have one more hand, and I know we're close to the end of our time. If we have a couple minutes, or I don't know how you want to.
Yvonne, I think Yvonne Collins.
Yeah.
Hi, Yvonne.
Yeah.
Hi,
Go ahead,
Dr.
Yvonne.
Costa. I'm
Hi.
from Virtua Pediatric Early Intervention. You came when we were just Virtua Early Intervention, and thank you so much. I agree with Lori Creighton. You have been amazing in our development of what we do. I did want to share on what you were just talking about, the level of when a child gets a diagnosis and then the family dealing with the diagnosis and then pairing it with what you were just talking about today.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you for sharing stories from your own personal life. And the one time that you told us about the drawing that you had done of all the things that you were imagining that was going to happen in the future. And then the idea of a diagnosis taking that away. I shared that recently with a family.
Oh yeah.
And they were so funny. Like, they interpreted that, and they were like, the next time I saw them, like, we did your homework. I'm like, what homework?
Oh my gosh, they took it concretely. That's wonderful.
Yeah. And they're like, we're not artists, but it was so cute. They worked together and they made this beautiful like map of pre-diagnosis, diagnosis, and the future, the hope of knowing a diagnosis. And it was so beautifully done. And ever since then, they were able to realize where their emotional level was, and then realize, I do have hope for the future. It wasn't just all taken away. So thank you. That little seed that you planted just happened this year. And last time I saw you was probably like 20 years ago. So
well,
thank you.
My recollection is, to give some credit, is I think I probably at the time was really learning a lot from Ken Moses. I don't know if that's a familiar name to you, but Ken Moses is a psychologist out in Evanston, Illinois, and he was doing a lot of stuff really talking about helping families to concretely imagine their future.
Yeah.
And yes, and no, I appreciate
And
that.
and the end of your presentation that I remember was you showed what the future was, that there was a future. It just looked different, but you were still able to play sports. It was just different sports. So,
Well,
thank you. That really helped the family.
No, that's great. That's great. You know, I was going to say something about, and Jennifer, I know the time is up, but Jennifer, you said something just as right before Yvonne spoke, and I was trying to sort of address that, and I think I got derailed. I'm trying to remember what you said, Jennifer, right before.
I think it might have been about the parallel, because I think what folks are asking is how they can maybe best share this kind of information. And that was a great example, Yvonne, too, with families. So sort of how we are with kids, babies, like you talked about today. There might be a parallel. That what it was?
Well, you triggered back what I wanted to say, and I think I was probably using it as a springboard. You know, I guess one of the themes throughout today, and I know we have to end soon, and I so appreciate you sticking around a little bit longer. One of the themes has been to really think so much about the way a child might experience you, what your affect, what your gestures, what your pacing, what your movement is like. And I think that in many ways, when we are anxious as adults, as parents, or when we are frustrated or angry or just plain tired, you know, we sometimes lose touch of our own bodies. We sort of don't realize how, you know, our voice might change, or facial expression may change. And I really think in so many ways, one of the lessons is to really pause, you know, to really pause and take a moment. I'm a real fan, and some of you know many different strategies about breathing exercises. Some of you may know of an exercise, you can even Google it. It's called the 4-7-8 breathing exercise, where you breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds, hold it for 7 seconds, then breathe out of your mouth for 8 seconds or more. You fully exhale. By the way, the good news, when you fully exhale, breathing out activates your parasympathetic nervous system. And that is the nervous system that sort of calms down the fight or flight or freeze response. And so even sometimes, as my old supervisor used to say so much, getting in cahoots with yourself, trying to sort of really, you know, help yourself calm, and it helps us in our approach with children. I think the other thing I wanted to say, and I know I'm running on and we got to stop, is that I said this earlier. I have been struck by how helpful it is when a child is having a hard time for me to slow down, for me just to pay attention to my own frenetic demeanor. I've seen children so upset and angry, and I would lean lower, go to their level, and even in a soft voice, a whispering voice, say, "You are so mad. You are so mad. Tell me." And they'll look at me, and they'll stop, they'll pause, and they'll say, "I think you're mad, aren't you?" And they'll shake their head. And I said, "Would it help you if I held you a little bit?" And they might shake their head, "No." "Would it help if maybe we walked together and maybe went to get a toy and we can play together?" And they might shake their head. And so slowing down, I can't tell you how, in terms of co-regulating, how our own demeanor is so helpful. Look, the whole purpose today was to talk about how do we make ourselves more available as a listener? And that means how do we help children get the idea that whatever they are feeling inside, we are trying to feel the feeling with them. For pre-verbal children, that's really hard. Right? We don't always know. We take our best guess. You know, we try our best to mirror in our own facial expressions and our voice how they feel. And we might offer a word, but I think the real lesson I hope for today about listening to children is to really try to find a way to use everything you have to convey to them that you're interested in how they feel. You're interested in their point of view. You're interested, you know, in letting them know we all want somebody to hear us, and I think that's what the listening is about. I'm just looking at stuff. Oh, thanks, Jennifer. You are repeating some of the stuff from the Agile court.
Yeah, because
I
I'm
appreciate-
visual, so I need to see it. So for those of you, we will also make the presentation available. And I think what you said about that was a really nice place to end up is, you
Yeah.
know, everybody, including infants, including the adults we work with, including people you run into, want to feel heard and felt with. So I think that's a really nice nice summary that
I wish we could have
kinda
been in the
worked
same
out.
room together and hung
I
out.
know.
This is the next best thing. This is the next
Yeah.
best thing. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jennifer, for the invitation, and Cynthia. Folks, thanks so much for being part of this.
Thank you, Gerry.
Thanks.
Nobody like you.
Oh, I don't know about that, but I appreciate it. So good to see everyone and my old